Cult of the Lamb is a fun management sim, but not so much a fun dungeon crawler, which is unfortunate since it's such a big chunk of the game, but it's the situation we're all in. I don't have an issue with the resource management side of the game, it's the combat, and to explain why updates probably can't salvage it, it's pretty slow, monotonous, and you only have 2 attacks with little enemy attack variety, I'll turn your attention to Diablo 3 real fast. Yet, before I do so, let me communicate that I bring all of this up because I've seen tons and tons of comments, not just on my own video, but others as well that talk about oncoming updates that will give the game the rightful 8 or 9 out of 10 it deserves. The developers don't owe us anything. They put out a title with a lot of charm and heart, but I still think the fighting is a low point of the game that's worth talking about. But as far as relying on updates, I have 2 problems with this mindset. One, it implies that it's alright for a game to have major dips in quality so long as it updates them out later. And 2, it's just not easy for an update, even a large one, to fix all of the underlying issues the combat has, because Diablo 3 launched really roughly, and I'm not even talking about the pay-to-win aspects that the real-world auction house had. I'm talking about having interesting abilities and balance issues. Don't get me wrong, fixing Diablo 3 was no easy task, and it required major reworks to many of the game's internal balance and synergies to get things running, but most of those changes were numbers, dials that could be turned up and down, or adjusted to a point where they were reasonably balanced. Because it was mostly a numbers game, it didn't require making tons of new animations or enemies to keep things fresh. They just sorted out what they already had created. Cult of the Lamb's less than ideal fighting mechanics are intrinsic in how the game flows, and moving anything around could have large reaching ramifications on surrounding aspects of the dungeon delving, which, yes, was also the case with D3 to an extent, but think about it. If they added light and heavy attacks, dash strikes, and other moves in their next big update, they'd have to make a reason for their inclusion. There'd have to be an incentive for the player to use those different moves to be able to progress through the levels. This would require reworks to all existing enemies for this new moveset to fit. Consider Hades, where the special attack you do with your blade does a sizable AoE attack. Sure, the player could get by just using their quick attack, but they have a lot of incentive to use this AoE one because of the abundance of small, low HP enemies that they're bound to come across on their runs. Little design decisions like this are peppered all throughout Hades, and Cult of the Lamb just does not have this baked into its DNA. Adding those moves would provide no real utility because the game has already existed without those moves and is very much beatable as is. Basically what I'm saying is large sweeping changes would have to be made to the enemy roster as well for any of this to work, and I need to reiterate that adding more moves isn't necessarily the solution to Cult of the Lamb's combat problem. If you're not counting items, Dead Cells only lets you use 2 different attacks at a time, but has a much more enjoyable combat system because of the interesting positioning you have to do with your different weapon types and the cool synergies that you can have in your equipment. I don't mean to come off as ungrateful or snobby in this video. I'm totally aware that the developers don't owe us anything. They put out a fun, enjoyable little indie that I totally think is worth your time. And on top of that, they plan on releasing free updates in the future. But we also have to be realistic with our expectations, and saying that a patch is the end-all be-all for making parts of this game better just comes off as a massive deflection of the game's issues for me. Nowadays, it seems like every single title that gets released has to be this massively replayable thing, and maybe it's not what the developers were going for, but with how much the game advertised itself as a roguelite, it was important to communicate in my video that it just doesn't live up to the longevity of things like The Binding of Isaac. I still think it's definitely worth keeping your eye on as new updates come out though, because they might still be worth trekking through at least once, and if you want to know exactly what those future updates will have, I'll go ahead and let you know in the future. Just be sure to subscribe.